What if Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki were isekai'd into Demon Slayer? How would events play out if we tossed them into battle against demons? Would they survive or meet their end? Before we get into that though, first I have to tell you guys who the art for this thumbnail was made by. And it was made by Guit, and I had it redrawn by iCard. You can find both of their links down below in the description. Also, if you go on to enjoy the video, make sure to slap a like on this video because it genuinely helps out so much more than you guys think, and it only takes 1 second. That said, enjoy. This entire story would essentially all kick off right after Izuku would essentially have just finished his vigilante arc. And just like in the anime, Izuku would then be pressured into taking a bath with all the boys in Class 1A. But when he would do so, himself, Bakugo, and Todoroki would be the last ones left. And with this happening, they're all having a very deep and meaningful conversation. When suddenly, as they're straight just chilling, they look down and notice that a vortex would have begun forming underneath them. That's when suddenly they would be sucked in by this blinding light and they would appear in some dirty, foggy water. Keep in mind, they're naked. They look up only to see this gigantic demon thing holding up some guy with a boar head, and immediately Deku decides to jump into action, noticing Inosuke getting choked out by the gigantic demon during the Mount Natagumo arc. And as soon as Izuku locks eyes with the demon, Izuku would immediately blitz over there naked, and as he's making his way there, Bakugo would shoot off explosions saying, "Out of the way, Deku!" Izuku gets sent flying back, and Bakugo would immediately blitz at this demon and slam a full-powered explosion straight at the demon, sending him flying right at Todoroki, who, not wanting to get hit by this big behemoth of a demon, would slam his foot on the ground, freezing it in place. And then, as this is happening, Izuku would turn towards the direction of Inosuke, or the kid with a boar hat, and would go on to ask, "Are you okay?" It'd be at this moment that Inosuke would respond, "Yeah, I'm okay." From here, Bakugo would then go on to turn towards the direction of Inosuke and ask him if there's more of those things. And Inosuke would go on to just point out in the direction in which he remembers Tanjiro to be in. This would lead Bakugo, Todoroki, and Izuku to make their way over there. And upon arriving, they would notice that Tanjiro was just about to get cut up by a bunch of strings. It would be at this moment that Bakugo would come flying in once more, not playing no types of games, and would blast an explosion full powered, sending Ryu through 3 trees. Eventually, Rui would get back up after having been healed, and Bakugo turns towards him, saying that this guy, he seems to have some sort of regeneration quirk. Looks like he gets to go all out, blitzing back towards him and going insane with the AP shots. This would lead Bakugo to just start blasting explosions over and over and over and over and over again, and Todoroki and Deku both to just kind of have that anime-esque water drop coming off of their foreheads. As this is happening, Giyu would end up making his presence known along with Shinobu, and once they both end up getting to the battlefield, what I generally see happening is Giyu just straight slicing the head of Rui off using Dead Calm, and eventually Shinobu going over towards the direction of Nezuko, trying to finish her. And let's just say that Izuku doesn't exactly take this lightly. Upon noticing that she's trying to harm some girl, he immediately gets in the way of her and says, "Wait, why are you doing that?" Shooting Black Whip at her so that she can't move, and because she's restrained, she really has no way of facing off against Izuku. But ultimately, once the situation would die down, I definitely see Izuku, Todoroki, as well as Bakugo making their way towards the Hashira rendezvous. Upon arriving, immediately the first thing that would be discussed would be Tanjiro's status as a demon slayer traveling along with a demon. This whole encounter would go down just like it would in the original. However, this time around, Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki would not stand for Nezuko being hurt, especially not Izuku. Coming from a world where discrimination against mutants is something very common, and that's exactly what Izuku thinks is the situation is at the moment. Eventually, I definitely do see the Hashiras going on to explain what demons are, how they work, and how they have no idea what this thing called quirks are, leading Izuku to pretty much show his off, Bakugo to show his explosions, and Todoroki to show his flames and ice. Immediately, all the Hashiras would be extremely on guard, thinking that that's some sort of demon blood art. However, through some heated explanation, they would both kind of understand each other. Izuku would realize that demons are very much so real in this alternate reality that they were sucked into, and they would realize that quirks is something that humans ended up evolving to get. But ultimately, after a bit of discussion going on this, they would then go on to explain that their powers and their abilities will be very useful on this quest to ultimately defeat Muzan. And eventually, after all this would happen, Tanjiro, Inosuke, as well as Zenitsu would all make their way towards beginning to heal themselves so that they could continue on with the following mission. and Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki would all definitely be informed that they're going to be training alongside Hashira to try to teach them how to wield a Nichirin blade and properly be able to dispose of demons. Deku would be assigned to Rengoku because I just genuinely do see the fit working. Bakugo would be alongside Sanemi because it's just, come on now, it's perfect. And Todoroki would work alongside Giyu due to the fact that they basically share the same personality. Eventually, they would be brought to their quarters where they're going to be getting some sleep for the night, and during this time, they would all ponder how they're going to get back home. As well as for the following next couple of weeks, they would have an anime training time skip. Todoroki, after all of this, would realize that using a sword is just not for him, and he decides that the main thing he's going to be doing is freezing them until the sun comes out, or just burning them as well. Izuku decides that he's actually just going to learn how to use a sword, considering that he's the kind of person that won't deny some extra training. And Bakugo would decide that he doesn't exactly like using a sword. He says that he'll just kill him, or the sun will do it for him. He doesn't need that weak Nichirin blade, he would say. And eventually after this, we would get the Mugen Train arc. Here's where events are going to be changing drastically. In the original, we have Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu going on this mission. However, this time with the addition of Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, Izuku offers his group to go alongside with Rengoku. He says that them as backup for Rengoku would be a lot more beneficial. At first, Tanjiro would say that it's his mission, but ultimately, Izuku, after giving him a big, bright, warm smile, the topic would be put to rest. And ultimately, Class 1A's big three would make their way alongside Rengoku. And eventually what would end up going down is they would make their way on the train. Just like in the Mugen movie, all of them would end up falling asleep. However, due to the fact that Izuku has one for all as well as the vestiges, I definitely do believe that they would be able to wake him up. This would lead Izuku to waking up Rengoku, Bakugo, and Todoroki, leading them to switch their attentions towards the demon that is currently controlling the train. Once awake, they would make their way towards where the demon Enmu is at, and eventually after a bit of back and forth in terms of Bakugo and Todoroki having to quite literally off themselves in the dream world, Bakugo would have a vision of himself being the user of One for All, and Todoroki would have a vision where his mother never burned him. It'd be kind of sad and cool, unfortunately, for both of them to break out of this world. They would do so and ultimately destroy the demon Enmu. Eventually, as this would be happening, Izuku as well as Rengoku would go through the train, freeing all of the passengers and eventually making their way outside where they would encounter the demon, the third ranking one, of course, Akaza. Once there, immediately Deku would decide that he wants to fight him. However, Rengoku would say, "Nah, I got this." And after a bit of back and forth, Deku would ultimately let it happen. This would lead to the Rengoku versus Akaza battle, and it would be a great one for Izuku to watch. However, once he realizes that Rengoku is actually on the back foot, Izuku using Black Whip would push Rengoku backwards, and using another tendril of Black Whip would grab onto Akaza, slamming him through 3 different trees, as he would then regenerate slowly, and then they would go on to have some sort of punch clash, seeing as they're both hand-to-hand type fighters, and Deku would finally begin taking it seriously, leading him to shoot another Black Whip tendril towards the direction of Akaza, restraining him until ultimately Troid smashes him into the train. And as Akaza would be dealing with all this damage, he would have realized that the sun, it's coming up, and Akaza knows that he doesn't have much time, so he would begin to beg and plead for his life. Ultimately though, Deku would not be allowing him to run away. However, it would be at this point that Akaza would then be caught off guard completely, as Bakugo would come flying in and blast an explosion at Akaza, who would have just barely been able to break out of Black Whip. He would restrain him and hold him down until the sun would burn Akaza completely. And after this, they would make their way back to the Hashira rendezvous, where they would then go on a train for the following next 4 months, and Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and Inosuke would be there present. Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki would get tired of waiting after the 4 months of training, and them getting even more powerful and adept with their quirks, would decide that they're gonna go out and, well, slaughter Muzan and his demon, seeing as they know it's been a while and they don't know how their own world is personally doing. And eventually this would lead them to the new Demon Slayer arc, which would be the Search for Muzan arc. Deku would go out using Danger Sense, as they would interrogate and destroy demons until eventually they find the Upper Moon Kokushibu. And upon having this all happen, Bakugo, who immediately thinks to himself that this is the one that he's gonna take out, considering Todoroki and Deku took out the previous 2, Bakugo would shoot explosions towards the direction of Kokushibu, which he would dodge and ultimately then try to speed blitz Kokushibu. But unfortunately, that just would not work. Bakugo would get a slash across his chest, and Bakugo would be sent back flying, having not have taken the demon seriously. Immediately, all three of them would look at each other in unison. Deku, Todoroki, and Bakugo would blitz in immediately. Deku shooting up Black Whip tendril at him, sending him flying at the sky, as Todoroki would use his brand new phosphorus technique to basically instant kill Kokushibu. After sensing his #1 ranking upper moon being destroyed, Muzan would immediately decide that he needs to go into hiding, because he realizes that if they took down Kokushibu, he's probably next. And as Muzan is deciding to make his way into hiding, simultaneously, it would just so happen that these three would be very, very close by, as Bakugo would bump into Muzan accidentally, and Bakugo, upon getting angry, would shove Muzan. Muzan would lose his cool because he doesn't enjoy it when humans look down on him, and Muzan would try to essentially destroy Bakugo with one fell swoop. However, he misses because duh. But then what would end up going down is Bakugo shoots an explosion at the direction of Muzan, and Deku and Todoroki would freak out upon realizing that this dude just used his quirk on a human, and ultimately Muzan would reveal his true demon form. Shocking all three of them, they would immediately swoop into action, and Izuku, using his ability of Black Whip, would shoot Muzan away into a different direction with less humans. Todoroki, Bakugo, and Izuku, using their quirks simultaneously, would fly towards the direction of Muzan, and ultimately Deku, using a full-powered 100% Fajin smash, would smash into Muzan, sending him into a crater in the earth. Bakugo shooting up into the air and blasting an AP shot at that direction, and Todoroki ultimately using a gigantic freeze attack, which would completely obliterate Muzan, and they would just leave him there to ultimately be thawed out in the sun and just die. They would then ultimately make their way back towards the direction of the Hashiras, where they would report the good news. All the Hashiras would immediately be stunned at their progress and the fact that these quirks have the ability to give them this much power. And ultimately, they eventually would find their way back towards a gigantic bathhouse, where Deku, Bakugo, and Todoroki would all be there. And ultimately, Inosuke would be there as well, deciding that he needed a bath as well. So with all four of them there, they would kind of just be having a relaxing talk. Inosuke would be annoying the absolute living life out of Bakugo. Deku and Todoroki would just smile before suddenly this weird whirlpool that sucked them into this universe would appear once again, and ultimately Inosuke would actually ultimately be shot back into the My Hero Academia universe, where once he's there, Inosuke would look around and say, "What?